No problem. Thank you. Oh. So thanks everyone for coming. Tonight we originally wanted to do this a bit hybrid. So Sharon and I had wanted to do it in the factory originally. But then yesterday we kind of got together and realized most people were needing to come in online anyway. So it was probably just easier then to do it all online. The reason I wanted it at the shirt factory is because my journey with Zoom is in 2020. I loved it because I'm allergic to people and it meant I didn't have to socially interact with people. So I thought Zoom was just the greatest thing in the world. I hate it now. And the idea of doing training via Zoom is my worst nightmare because it's very limited interaction. But bear with me. I'm going to share my screen, and especially when it's child protection training. Can you guys all see that? Is that
Yeah.
clear enough? So guest tonight is if we're being honest, it's well overdue. I don't think it'll take us. I know we've given ourselves till 9 o'clock. Realistically, it's not going to take me that long. But if there's things that pop up, questions for Sharon and I, or things that we even need to go away and look at and clarify, then we can do that. But yeah, I reckon it'll probably be about 40 or 45 minutes in total. But equally, it's something that's really important that I want to give weight to, so it's not something that I want to rush. Um, just a disclaimer at the start. Okay, the information provided and what we go through in the presentation, it's for guidance only. So it's not like what we go through tonight, it's not the complete and authoritative interpretation of the law, but it covers an awful lot, and especially for us in the voluntary sector, it goes through a fair bit. The other thing I want to say is there are some things we're going to touch on tonight that are very, very sensitive, and we don't know each other's story. If at any stage it does kind of overwhelm you and you need to take a minute, just shut off your video and go and take a minute because it's certainly not something that we want to make someone endure if they need if there's something that has triggered that they need to go and take a bit of time. So the aims is what we're going to cover tonight. If this actually starts to work. So it's to provide staff and volunteers in our church community with an insight into the vision and the values of the church, particularly with reference to children and youth ministry. We'll chat about that in a minute. Then to provide us with an understanding um, of the importance of your own code of conduct, really, and just as a volunteer to go over some of those things, to provide staff and volunteers with the opportunity to develop awareness of what you have to do if you do have a concern around the safety and welfare of children and young people. So that's something that realistically, since we haven't done this in a long time, you probably don't know if you did have a concern. What do you do? What are our procedures? Who are go-to people? And we really need to bring some clarity to that tonight, and then to provide staff and volunteers with details relating to child protection procedures in our church. So that's what we're going to try to do tonight as best as we can. So in Foyle Vineyard Church, I think it's clear that we have a strong heart for children and kids ministry. I would probably say that one of the things that we need to be mindful of in that is actually that our children aren't more important than other generations in the church, and that on the Sunday morning their needs are not the only needs that are present. Um, but nonetheless, they are an extremely important part of our church family. And what are we trying to create at Foyle Vineyard Church? A place of value and belonging. So they're not there because their parents are there. And they don't belong simply because their parents belong to us, but that as a child, they are part of our church community and we value them and they belong there. We're looking to create a place of safety and care. And that's, I suppose, tonight is a big part of looking at how we do that. And then a place of growth and encounter. And that's what you do as a volunteer when you're doing the kids, whether it be Little Vines or whether it be Vineyard Kids on a Sunday. is, it's not just running a program to entertain the kids so that the parents can do church with Ben. It is actually creating an environment where every child and young person from birth to the oldest person in with Ben in their own environment can encounter the power of the presence and the person of God, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and can grow in their spiritual walk and in their discipleship. And everything we look at, with safeguarding and with child protection, every procedure that we put in place has to be underpinned by those three things. So at the center of it, we have to be thinking, is this helping us achieve that vision? And if it's something that's not, that's maybe detracting from it, then that's something we need to go away and look at, because our procedures should be facilitating that our children value, that they are valued, that they belong, that they're safe, and that they're cared for, and that they're growing, and that they're encountering the Holy Spirit. And planning, so whenever we look at then our code of conduct and the volunteer code of conduct, our example that we look to is the example of Jesus. So we return to scripture and we look at every encounter that Jesus had with children. How did he engage with children as we see in the Bible? And what did he say about children, either to them or to adults who were present whenever he was engaging with children? And so there's a few things. First of all, he welcomed them, and he told us to do likewise. So he welcomed the children. He also rebuked anyone that would cause a child to sin. He instructed us to lay hands on them. He laid hands on them, and prayed for them with parents and with all our witnesses present. He told us to never look down on them, and we were never to hinder or to stand in their way. So that's the kind of framework that we operate in when we look at then the specifics around a volunteer code of conduct. But for us, this is really what we're saying we will do. We will do our utmost to be positive role models for the children in our care. So this includes our commitment to reading the Bible, prayer, worship, and service to them and to other people. So we can only give what we have to give. And so it's important for all of us to be investing in our own discipleship, so that we are role models and so that we can help disciple the children in our care. We will always praise good behaviour. Children will be encouraged but not forced to participate fully in activities. I want to touch on that a bit, because if you as a volunteer or a leader end up engaged trying to get kids to do an activity and someone's refusing, it can become an extremely frustrating position, and we can be at risk at that stage of making a judgment call as to why that child is behaving in that way. And often it comes down to our need to control the situation. So it's as if they're being defiant and they're refusing to do this for me. But there could be a multitude of reasons that we are unaware of as to why that's happening. And this is actually why kids' church is really difficult, because we have limited information about some of the kids that will come in, especially kids that maybe come in from the community that we don't know the parents particularly well. So it's really important that we don't try to force children to participate in activities that they're maybe not wanting to. We encourage, we cajole, we try to facilitate it, we try to support them to do it. But there could be a multitude of reasons that we're unaware of, so we don't force them to do it. Some of them could be learning as much as anything else. We have Sharon produces great resources for us, but we also don't know the level of learning that every child has that'll come in. So we encourage them to, but we don't force them to. We will value children by providing high quality teaching, worship, and resources. So for me as a parent, I want to say that that's something I really appreciate that you all do. And I want to take a minute to thank Sharon for that, because Sharon leads that brilliantly in the church, where she dedicates a lot of time and a lot of energy to making the resources good. I have always felt from whenever Shan Lee was in charge as well, that in Foyle Vineyard, the culture was very much not that'll do. but that it will be great and excellent, and that we will give to our kids the same as we would expect whoever's preaching to the adults, the effort and the energy that they would put in on a Sunday. So Sharon produces a lot of it, but all of you that give up time to, make sure that you're prepared to teach a lesson on a Sunday or to help in any way, that's something that we really see lived out. We will always respect the child by listening to them when they come to us. Again, we see that all the time. We will treat all children fairly, equally, and consistently. Physical punishment is strictly forbidden, so all discipline or all consequence will be based on love and will involve the child's parents and guardians. So we know now that physical chastisement is long gone in any environment, so whether it be home, whether it be in statutory sectors, or whether it be in the voluntary sector. So physical punishment is forbidden. Verbal abuse in the form of shouting at a child is forbidden. It's not who we are. We appreciate that a leader may, on specific occasions, need to shout, but that's if you're warning a child of danger. So we've just included that because obviously if someone's in danger, you're shouting to try to keep them safe. But shouting's not a way that we ever manage behaviour, because it fosters a culture really of fear and a spirit of fear rather than of security. So in school, I always talk to our staff and their interactions and engagement with our young people as the parent present. So would you speak that way if the parent was present? And that's what I want us to think about as well in Foyle Vineyard. An appropriate ratio of adults. We'll talk about those specific figures towards the end because it's easier when we come to look at ourselves in Foyle Vineyard Church. But an appropriate ratio of adults to children will be maintained at all times. Personal information will be kept confidential in line with data protection laws, and appropriate physical contact is always in direct response to the child needs. Now, I've got that in for a specific reason. At the start, we were talking about everything that we want for our kids. That happens in environments that are nurturing and loving. And environments that are nurturing and loving do include physical contact. So sometimes because of the law now forbidding physical punishment, what some environments that have been created is where there's a lack of touch. But touch is actually a really powerful nurturing tool for positive. So if a child is upset, it is totally appropriate to comfort that child and not to feel that you can't or to be restricted because our policy has restricted you from doing that. So that's in there, that appropriate physical contact is entirely good. Code of conduct for children and young people. This is not so much obviously for you guys, but it's just for, especially for people in Vineyard Kids, to know that we do have expectations on how the young people should behave. And it is okay if that's not happening for us to look at that and what we do moving forward, because that environment is a shared environment for all the kids. And so if one child's behavior or conduct in some way is affecting that, then we do need to look at that. So how do we do it? Positive behavior is encouraged and recognized and rewarded. Children are encouraged to respect other people at all times. So where we're encouraging kids to share and they have ideas, then the culture has to be right for that to happen. They have to feel safe, to put their hand up and share their ideas. So this means behaving well towards friends and leaders, listening well to others and speaking words that build up rather than tear down. Then, if that's the case, then in light of that ethos, physical fighting isn't going to be acceptable, because it's causing harm to another child. So I suppose the key word that you're looking for in all of this where you're ascertaining is intention. If the intention is to cause harm, then it's not okay. And we will need to speak to, in the actual kids ministry, then if that is happening, then you remove the child and take them back in to their parents or guardians for the remainder of the service, and then we'll address it appropriately at the end of the service. It's different than little vines. So in little vines, toddlers do this stuff. They bite, they hit, they don't know what they're doing. That behavior they have not learned yet that it isn't okay or that we don't do it. And so you have to deal with that at the time, and that's an entirely different situation. Bullying's never acceptable. So physical bullying, verbal bullying, emotional bullying, and we will need to look at that. What I would encourage you to do with bullying, if you're worried about it or considering that it might be happening, sorry, giving consideration to it, then I would encourage you to come and speak to myself or Sharon, because it's it's slightly more difficult to define, and it's a word that sometimes I think can be misconstrued, and it can be quite inflammatory. So with bullying, again, the key criteria you're thinking of is intention to cause harm. It can be a one-off incident, but generally with bullying, you would be looking at persistent behaviour and repeated behaviour. But nonetheless, if one of our children is being treated really badly, whether it's bullying or not, for us not to address that simply because it maybe causes an uncomfortable situation over here is allowing one of our children to be left subjected to that. And that has a significant effect on their emotional development. So we cannot do that, and we can't ever ignore it, because it's church and we don't really want to have those conversations. It's why we're having this training as well, so we can see it kind of what conversation the leaders need to have, and what things maybe need to come to me, and that's okay. Children, so Sharon talked about this because we have had it. Children are not permitted to have their mobile phone on their possession while in little vines, which would be crazy. If they have a mobile phone and they're in little vines, you have like all freedom to judge, no problem, just judge that parenting. But even in Vineyard Kids, I will be judging it, because kids have mobile phones ridiculously early in their life nowadays, and they definitely cannot be taking it to Vineyard Kids. It'll be a huge distraction for them and others if they decide to bring it out, and it just causes an unnecessary situation. So they must leave their phones in with their parents while attending the children's ministry. Okay. Any questions before we move on any of that?
You were talking about mobile phones. What about toys?
For Vineyard Kids?
Yeah.
So toys generally could bring, potentially, Dawn, they could bring comfort for whatever reason they're brought out for. So I wouldn't want to stipulate in the policy that they're not to be there, because there could be a genuine reason why the child has brought it. Again, if it became for one particular person on a given week, if it was an issue, it's something you could talk to the parent about afterwards and just ask, is there a reason why they have it? Because I did find as the leader that it was quite distracting, but I wouldn't want to stipulate that they couldn't have it, because sometimes it is there for like an attachment issue or for a comfort.
Yeah, just on that, Dawn, what I normally do if somebody brings lots of toys with them, and they want to show it to everybody, and I just say, do you want to just leave that on the bench, and when you have time at the end, we'll do it at the end. It's just normally my approach.
No problem.
Any other questions about even the volunteer code, anything? Or is it all happy enough? So now we get into more the Northern Ireland, the framework that we work under, the sort of legal and guidance bit of it. So the major and the principal governance that we work under within Northern Ireland in any sector is the Children's Northern Ireland Order, and it was instituted in 1995. Okay, and it applies to anybody who works with or cares for children. So this order is what applies to parents. It applies to anyone in the statutory agency that has care for children, a doctor, a nurse, a teacher, and volunteers in the voluntary sector, like you guys working in church and looking after kids. So this is kind of the framework or the piece of legislation that we work under. Other pieces of legislation that have been introduced in different sectors, this has kind of been the background to all of that. And if anything, it has been there to clarify key aspects of this in that particular setting or circumstance. So what it basically laid out was what they called the five key principles, or the five P's. And the first one that I've got at the center there, because it is central to everything, it underpins the other four, is paramountcy of the child. So that, in simple form, that means that the interests of the child are always paramount, and that our concern as volunteers is always child first. Now, thinking how that could play itself out, because I'm trying to apply it to our setting in church, I guess. So an example of where that could play itself out would be if some of you were told something by a child, or saw something and had concerns. But what's different in church is there is a significant chance that that concern could relate to a child whose parents you're quite close with. Do you know what I mean? So it is, child protection could potentially be quite awkward in a church situation, because there are community, there are people, and there are friends. And so that piece of paramountcy means that you have to think child first, and your primary concern is the child. And anything else around the parents and the parents' rights and everything, they come secondary to that. And that piece of legislation instructs that. Then next is PR, so parental responsibility. So parents have responsibility for all aspects under this order of their child's care, their child's safety. If they need assistance with it, then there's agencies there to support with that. And that's where partnership comes in as well, where, in order to achieve that, sometimes it has to be a partnership with other agencies like social services, schools, health trusts, and everything else. And then the bottom two kind of come a wee bit together, but it's important we know how they're subtly different. So prevention is really what we're looking at today. So prevention are the systems and the procedures and processes that we need to have in place to protect our children and to keep them safe. So the starting point of that is this training, and as they make sure that we're all aware of the legislation, we're aware of how to handle situations if they arise, but we're also aware of Foyle Vineyard's processes and our procedures, and it's important that we are, in order to prevent things happening. Sometimes it's information sharing. There are some things that may need to be shared over the next few years on a need-to-know basis, that if you're a leader in Vineyard Kids, there may be information that you need to know in order to keep children safe. At the most straightforward example of that is nut allergies or food allergies. In order to prevent something happening and keep children safe, we need to know if the child has a nut allergy. There's no point in me knowing that and then not sharing it to the leader in charge on a Sunday. So again, that's where our systems need to come in, as to how are we effectively communicating that and making it accessible to the leader in charge on that day. And then protection is a wee bit different, because protection is more around a specific case, around a specific child or a specific family. So protection would be more when a concern had been raised, or when we had a concern, it's how do we then respond. So prevention is kind of more preventative, obviously that's in the name, and proactive, and protection is kind of more responsive to something as it arises. Does that make sense? And then we have the legislation which actually defines the 5 different types of abuse that we work under within the legislation in Northern Ireland. So harm from abuse is not always straightforward to identify, and we'll talk about that through this. This is probably the most sensitive slide. Okay, so I hope I don't trigger anything with anyone. If I do, it's not my intention, but we need to be aware of it. But abuse is not always straightforward to identify. And young people may experience more than one of these, okay, and more than one harm or significant harm. So, but child abuse really occurs when the behaviour, it can be at the hands of other children. but often it is someone in a position of greater power than a child that causes them harm. Um, and pretty much it's an abuse of power over a child. Um, the common denominator is pretty much that the intention of it is to make them feel bad or to make them feel worthless, and it always robs them. It'll always rob a child of any sense of value or any sense of worth, which is why it's so important that we respond appropriately to it, because there's significant damage done. So the first one, which is probably, I'd say, the most straightforward, which is awful, but it's probably is in some ways the most straightforward to clarify, is physical abuse. I'm giving a very basic overview of them today, and I acknowledge that. In our policy, which will be, so with our policy, guys, we've reviewed and rewritten the policy. It'll be ratified at the next directors meeting. And when they've signed off on it and they're happy, if there's changes that need to be made, the changes will be made. But when they've signed off and are happy on it, we will then need to circulate that broader policy to all of you. That'll definitely put you to sleep at night if you're struggling any night to go to sleep. But we will need to communicate that out, because whenever we're looking at these 5 types of abuse, in one of the appendices in it, there's more detail given to signs and symptoms of abuse. With physical abuse, it is deliberately, it's an important word, but it is when a child is deliberately hurt physically. So the most common forms that it takes would be hitting or biting, but it can be pinching, shaking, throwing, burning, drowning, but it is the intentional, deliberate act of hurting a child physically. Emotional abuse is then some maltreatment of the child. Sometimes it used to be called psychological abuse, so it's intentionally putting them down so that you're affecting them, their emotional health. And I guess the key word in it then tends to be more to do with persistence. So persistently putting the child down and making them feel worthless or unloved or inadequate in some way. So a lot of it's around language that's used towards children, that our language can remove any sense of worth from them, and that causes emotional abuse. Then sexual abuse occurs when someone exploits a child sexually for their own gratification. Sometimes it involves physical contact, but it's important to note it doesn't always involve physical contact. So it can be, especially nowadays, a lot of it is relating to technology and exploiting children for images, and asking them to perform maybe different acts on a phone, and using technology to abuse them. That is still a form of sexual abuse. Primarily, stats do show that it's primarily males that are the perpetrators, but not solely. Okay, so women do also abuse sexually children, and also peer-to-peer is also sadly all too common. Okay. Now, see the first 3, we'll talk about this maybe a bit later, but the first 3 are probably the ones that as a volunteer you're most likely in church to ever have to respond to. Okay, not solely, but I would say they're the ones you're most likely to, for what I'll talk about in a minute. The next 2 are neglect and exploitation. Exploitation's just been added in more recent years. Neglect is a failure to provide for a child's basic needs. So that's like food, shelter, clothing, supervision. So it's a failure to provide for those basic needs. Neglect by nature is more subjective in the initial person that causes the concern. So if we had been in the shirt factory tonight, I would have done an activity with everyone where at one end of the room I had a poster saying neglect, and at another end of the room I had a poster saying not neglectful. And I would have gone through about 10 different scenarios and asked you to go to whatever side of the room you thought it was. You all would have probably looked at Sharon and just followed Sharon to wherever she went. But if you had had the bravery to go to where you wanted, I can guarantee you would have ended up in different places, and some of them, if not in all of them, because your own experience does naturally dictate what you see as being neglectful or not. And some of that's your childhood experience. You know, some of us were raised in like more chaotic homes. Then a wee bit of chaos in our lives, we don't necessarily, or in our kids' lives, we don't necessarily see as neglectful, because we could have been in a chaotic home where there was loads of love and loads of care, but just everything wasn't perfect, and Mary Poppins wasn't their mum. And then some of us are, you know, we are Mary Poppins' mummy, where everything is perfect. And so when that child comes in and they're wearing the same pair of socks for the second or third day in a row, that's a sign of neglect. And it's not a right or wrong, but it just shows and exposes that when we're looking at neglect, we bring our own experience and our own opinion and subjectivity to it in a way that we don't with some of the other ones that are kind of more clear cut. And where neglect, so in school, it's easier to probably make a call because you're seeing the child every day. So it's easier for you to monitor that. And it's easier for me and Les Neil to monitor and track it. And I guess they make a judgment call then as to when, regardless of opinion, it is no longer open to question, if you know what I mean. That is going to be more difficult on a Sunday morning where you're seeing a child for 30 minutes. Now, never ignore it if you have a concern. Come and talk to Sharon and talk to me about it, because at the very least we can come up with a plan going forward as to how we monitor it or how we address it. But it's less likely that when we look at reporting and recording in a minute, it's less likely you're going to be doing that about neglect or about exploitation. Because exploitation is actually whenever someone exploits young people for their own personal gain, primarily not all financial gain, but for their own personal gain. So it can be like trafficking, it can be slavery, it can be servitude. And one of the ones maybe we need to be most, not necessarily Foyle Vineyard, but that I need to be most aware of and looking for that would happen would be young people being exploited by paramilitaries in our city, and signs and symptoms for that. So it is not going to be as common for you guys, but still it's important that we cover it today. Okay, any questions on that? I guess for most people, the biggest concern will be what do I do if? So what do I do if I have a concern? I would say if you have a concern, something's not been said to you, but just from observation and from watching, if you have a concern, come and talk to me. And then what do I do if a child says something to me? So if a child, for example, comes in and says to you, my mum hit me last night, what do you do? And we've just shown we have to respond. Okay.
Craig, so just one question. I don't know if it's a question or a comment, but it's on the issue of sort of corporal punishment, or that sort of thing being reported. I mean, I'm very conscious we have a lot of cultures coming into our community now, and I know you have the primary thing is the law of the land, which is obviously child protection. But I suppose it's something we should be aware of. I mean, I'm conscious of African cultures, for example, where corporal punishment seem to be acceptable, but clearly when they're in our country, it isn't.
Yeah, and that is right, and that is something that could well happen in our country. I think that's where how we respond. So that will be on me or on Sharon to respond in the right way. What I would say to you as volunteers is you still must respond exactly the same way as I'm laying out now, and you must pass that to us, because how we go about handling that and communicating what we have to do to manage that well will be really important. But what I can't do is go, well, that's cultural, so I don't need to respond in the right way within the legislation that I work under. Um, because ultimately I believe that that is still physical harm. And so it's not my job to investigate and to do it. But how I go about explaining the process to parents will be really important in that situation. But that'll be on me or on Sharon. So for you, if that happened, the first thing you do, like you guys are great, so you'll do this naturally, and I know you will. But I just talk about the 6 hours simply because we would have them up in our classrooms, simply because they give us like a framework to always be thinking about. So first of all, it's how you receive it. So it's coming to you in that moment. All you're really doing is naturally you'll listen. It's important you remain calm, so we don't go, oh what, oh wow, I was saying it. We just put on a brave face, and we just very calmly we listen. We accept what they're saying, and there's no judgment. So our attitude in that moment is non-judgmental. Okay, we reassure them. Oh. So then we reassure the child or the young person, you've done the right thing. You're right to have now said this. That the child is always right to have spoken. And we reassure them that they will be listened to, that we hear what they are saying. We don't promise something. So we don't promise that you won't pass it on, because we can't promise confidentiality. We don't promise what's going to happen or what will or won't happen, because we can't make promises that we don't know, but we just reassure them and promise them that they have done the right thing. Then we respond by telling, I've said, got the pupil there, telling the child what you're going to do. So it's important you let them know, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to now go and I'm going to talk to Craig or Sharon. I'm going to get someone else involved. And then you report it without delay. The nominated officers are myself and Sharon. Okay, so that'll be all done verbally, because that needs to be done then and there. Sharon and I will ask you to record it on our disclosure report form. So at that stage, you're stating the facts. And so that's really, really important. Okay, so it's just, what have they said? Use their words, not your own kind of interpretation of it. And we don't ask leading questions. It's all open-ended questions. So when did it happen? Where did it happen? Who was involved? What happened? Interestingly, with all the W's, you don't ask why. It's a very triggering question and the wrong circumstance for a young person. So it's just, and ultimately why can be open to interpretation. And what we're trying to do at this stage is not interpret anything. It's just deal with facts. You will then give that to myself and the child and their family, and their right to a non-judgmental, confidential response. So, like, I know you will do this naturally, but it's a case of once it's handed over to Sharon and I, from your perspective, you have handed it over, so there's no more talk about it. Okay. Any questions? Is that clear? Clear enough?
Yeah.
Sharon, anything?
No, I guess just the only thing, and Craig, maybe you answered this in my email, but if you or I aren't there, who's next?
Oh, what have I done? So if Sharon and I aren't there, it'll be go to one of the directors. So that'll be Alan or Ben. I kind of
Say it was like an outside, like say it was like a Bloom scenario. What is that different because it's not technically someone that's part of our church?
So that's a good question. So if it is a bloom scenario, my advice would be, so it probably doesn't sit under this policy. My advice would be, is it a child that has come to bloom, Steph, that has said something?
Oh no, this has not happened. I'm just
I
asking.
know, but I'm just in
Yeah,
that
sure. Yeah, yeah. In that instance, if it was a
in that
child, we had a concern about a child.
so if they have done it, my advice would be still to contact ourselves, because it's not happened in a sense during our kids ministry. Then the response will still be, Sharon, I would still be looking for the same thing, write it down and record it. Probably the slight difference is we are maybe less likely to be there, so we might be giving you advice over the telephone and how to respond in that instance. So if that comes to me, what I have to assess is the level of risk and how we respond. So is there a need to immediately respond, or is there not? So depending on the scenario, the advice that we give may be different. But I would probably still check in with us if you could. On the policy, our phone numbers are on there. I don't ever answer my phone, so you're probably best to phone Sharon.
Thanks, Craig.
I kind of refuse. I like to live off grid. Sunday morning, no problem. You can go to Sharon and then she'll phone Alison and Alison will tell me. So then this is the final. We're near the end there, one. So this is us. So now, okay, that's kind of generally legislation. So actually on a Sunday morning within Foyle Vineyard Church, where are we and what are our policies and procedures? Some of these are in process and we hope they have finalised over the next 2 or 3 weeks. But today's a really good opportunity to still talk about them. So the first one is parental consent forms. So like the child registration forms, they're actually meant to be done annually anyway. And it's good practice to have that in the policy and they stick to it, because things change, medical conditions change, and we need to be, rather than just kind of expecting parents to come and bring any changes to us, we need to be a wee bit proactive and going and trying to get it. So with it being January and February, it's a good time to do that anyway at the start of the year. So Sharon,
Sorry, can I ask? I'm not fully familiar with the form, but does it ask about allergies, for example?
Yeah.
And I suppose, does it ask the parent because obviously, as you say, something could change within the space of a year. If they become allergic to something during the year, is there a reminder to the parent to report that?
We could put that wee line in, that any changes, they come and inform us. At the minute, it includes medical conditions, it includes allergies. The other thing that we have included on it, the other thing we've included on it is the giving permission for an elder sibling to take a child to the toilet. So we gave quite a bit of thought to that. But the truth is that is a lot of our family's normal way of working. So it is perfectly reasonable if I would do that in a shopping centre, and if I would say to Caleb, some parents wouldn't, and that's okay. But if I am happy to say to Caleb, would you take Joshua into that toilet? Then it's perfectly reasonable, if that's my family's normal way of working, for me to say to Caleb on a Sunday, will you take Joshua up the stairs to the toilet? Or for the kids leader to be able to come and get me or Caleb to do that. What we haven't done previously is requested that the parent give specific permission for that to take place. And we're doing that now because we see it happening. And I don't want to stop it because, as I say, it is normal family life. But we do need to have permission to allow that to happen, because it's still not the parent taking the child. So those forms we're encouraging it to be online. It's a Google form that'll now go on the link tree and the QR code that's behind the chair in front of you. So we're encouraging parents to do it online, but we will have some printed copies there on a Sunday for parents to fill in if they haven't done it. What we'll need to do from that then is we need to there's no point in us giving the leaders 15 of those. You don't need to be aware of a pile of the information on it. So we need to then extract the key information and create it in like a user-friendly way on a Sunday so that leaders can very quickly go, right, there's so and so, there's their allergies. Ben has given Eli permission to take Mike to the toilet, so I can go and get Eli, and so on. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So they'll be done probably we'll be pushing it over the next 3 to 4 weeks to try to get them in. And it'll be good to do it actually this time of the year, because then every January or February we're probably thinking about revisiting this same process. The sign and sign out sheets don't change. Parents have to sign them in and parents have to sign them out. They are the leader's responsibility until the point that they are signed out, and we're very clear on that once they're signed out, they are the parents' responsibility. We went back and forward on a few things about this, but if we start to extend our responsibility beyond that, where it's going to be very, very difficult. So it's actually all the things that we're talking about are only your responsibility while they are signed into your care. So, for example, an accident happens during Little Vines. An accident report form needs to be filled in by the leaders. An accident happens during tea and coffee time. An accident report form needs to be filled in by the parent, because they are not the leader's responsibility at that stage. Does that make sense? Policy will be sent out whenever it's been ratified. Hopefully it'll be ratified. Like, it's good, and I've put a lot of time into it. So if Ben and Alan and Shane decide to get sticky with me, I'm going to be raging, and I'm probably going to quit. But anyway, it can't go out there until it's ratified. But it's good. And in the back of it, in the appendices, there's the disclosure record form, which will be printed out separately anyway. We'll have copies of those available, and an accident report form. Ratios. These are the current ratios, and we're not changing them. We'll explain why in a minute. So Little Vines, actually the 0 to 3, there are 0 to 1s. The babies is 1 to 3. But we don't really have too many of the tinies coming out without a parent. So generally speaking, in Little Vines, it is 1 to 4. And that's adults. So while Eden, Faith and Micah going out is a great help, it's lovely, they don't help at all with ratios. These are adults. So adults are 1 to 4. And if we end up with 9 out there on a Sunday, we need to go to one of the parents and ask them to come out as an additional hand. Okay?
Sorry, Craig, can I just, and maybe Ben, like, what is the best way to do that? Because, well, Steph and Catherine might be able to talk more about Little Vines, but for Vineyard Kids, we are definitely over the numbers at times. Is it like, how do we want to do that on a Sunday morning? Are we just coming back into the service?
So I think, Ben, you can come in. I think one of the things that's really important after this process that we do tonight, the next step that we need to think about really carefully, is our communication with parents. Because this is really like the leaders, but we need to communicate these policies and procedures really effectively to our parents. And hopefully, Sharon, that would help with that, where if they understand, because they need to understand the rationale for these things, that why we've got the 1 to 8. And if they understand the rationale, then on a given Sunday, if we're asking someone else to come out to help, it's because of this is the way. So I think you, Ben, and I probably need to get together and think, how do we get parents, Ben, maybe even on a Sunday, I suppose I was thinking, like, I hate Zoom, so I'm not into this crack, like as I've said before, but I want to say it again just to clarify it in case you missed it the first time. But I was thinking, even, on a Sunday, could we have 10 minutes with them just to talk through new procedures and go through this face to face?
Yeah, I think we can have a chat about that, but I think there's definitely some communication up the front that I think would be helpful. We don't necessarily have to do all of what we talked about, but certainly helping people understand about the sign in, sign out, just being really clear about that, maybe quite regularly, but also talking about the ratios with everyone is really helpful. So it gives you a sense of this is who's serving and helping, and maybe looking at a way to do that. So we might look at a bank of parents that are happy to step on without needing to be asked, but then just saying, look, if we don't have a parent, we can't actually run kids, you know, so we're gonna have to think about that. So I think just communicating that, and you can help me with that. I think that'll help in and of itself. And then everybody knows that's the thing. So if someone comes in and we need to interrupt, that's fine. It's part of family.
Yeah, and maybe even if we assigned a leader to be at the checkout desk, like just watching the numbers, so as when you're going over, and then you can maybe, rather than having to interrupt the service, you can maybe just say to whoever's unlucky, like last to sign in, do you think, could you stay? Maybe
Yeah,
not.
I think there's a few ways we could do it. We can have a chat about that, and I'm happy to come up with a simple
I
plan.
just was thinking there about how I've stopped doing it, but I was previously taking numbers. So I was going in and recording the little vines numbers and the kids' numbers. So I would have recorded that every week just myself, that I can go and report it. I wonder, is that whoever's doing that role, then that can become the thing that they're documenting it anyway. When everyone's signed in, then they'll know there's not enough adults there for that amount of kids. That person can be the point person to go and get someone.
It's a good idea, Steph. Yeah.
And I think that would be good, because the other thing was, when Sharon and I were chatting about the ratios, is that we know we're going over them at times, but we don't really know exactly how often. So like when we're looking at policies and procedures, like at my end, I'm trying to think, do we, well, not that I'll explain them in that way, I wouldn't change the ratio, but like, for example, if we're always going to 18 in Vineyard Kids, then rather than picking a parent every week, it's at one stage, if it's 4 out of every 5 weeks, we just need to have a third adult timetabled on.
Yeah.
And if we're actually keeping track of that, we can look at it and go, the majority of the time now we need the third adult, so let's just schedule the third adult. So that would be good. Sharon chatted to me about the numbers in Vineyard Kids, and I'll be honest, I went back and forward about the 1 to 8. So when I thought about it, if we go right back to the very beginning of the presentation, when we talked about our vision and values, and then our code of conduct, and one of the things being excellence of delivery and of program, I don't want to change that ratio just to make it more manageable for us from a staffing point of view or a volunteer point of view, but actually in doing that, compromise the quality of the delivery or the quality of the session. Does that make sense? So whenever I was thinking about it, I was like, the majority of our leaders are volunteers, and they're volunteers that aren't necessarily teachers. So the level of capacity is excellent. The level of confidence may not be for everyone. There may be varying levels of confidence. And for me to kind of then ask, can we go up to 1 to 10? That could put someone under just a wee bit more pressure, and it could compromise a wee bit of the delivery. So I think, no, for volunteers, I think 1 to 8 is more than appropriate. And then if we get to the stage where we're beyond that, then we need to look at it in a more kind of proactive and strategic way. But I think having those numbers being kept, Steph, would at least help us see how often.
There's a couple of questions there in the chat just about youth.
Yes.
Whether that's like
Johnny asking those. Just
Josh and Jonathan are chatting back and forward a little bit. So good practice. Residential is 1 to 8, non-residential 1 to 10. But he doesn't know what our policy is, so that's maybe something we need to just stipulate, whether it's the same as Vineyard Kids or whether it is slightly different. I don't know what we have in there.
Slightly higher.
Can't remember what it is.
It's slightly different.
It's probably in there already, but we can check that out.
Yeah, it's slightly different.
Could I ask a question? And you might be going to cover this anyway, but it's a scenario I'll describe that involved myself some time ago. So it was quite a while ago. One, obviously, when you get the little vines, they're all quite needy, and I went in. I took Luca into little vines to give Claire and Neil a chance to actually be in the service. But I'm very conscious when you're with little vines, it's very hard not to engage with other kids because they're there and they want to engage with you. But it's just about I was very conscious that I was there for Luca and not for anybody else. But it's just maybe guidance for any parents that are accompanying rather than, do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose from if I'm being really from a legal point of view, you cover, you help us being out there, even if you're there for Luca, because you are an extra adult in
Yeah.
the room.
Well, I mean, on
From
that day, sorry, I should have said on that day, there was only one ad, there was quite a lot of kids, I can't remember, but there was only one adult and one youth volunteer, which you said didn't meet the criteria. And I know things have changed since then, but I could see like the one person was under huge pressure.
and
Yeah.
those are things that we're obviously trying to avoid.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah, that
again,
doesn't that scenario isn't happening anymore. So we've ensured that there's a second adult
Mhm.
with that one. I think Craig, in the policy that I had written, and I suppose just for us, to keep an eye on, it said about if you lead more than 4 times, then you're now you need like the proper checks, because obviously we have people that will like fill in when we have gaps. So like we have a couple of parents who maybe will fill in if we're very short, but haven't been accessed and I checked.
Mhm.
So I guess we just need to keep an eye on, like, if somebody is maybe filling in more than 4 times in the year, then they need to go through that whole process.
yeah, yeah, that's a good idea.
Okay.
It's good to give us that window of 4. I think from memory as well, to answer Johnny's question, for youth, it is a bigger ratio. I think I've put a line in that if Johnny is the youth leader, that it can be 1 to 50, just because Johnny can handle it.
I cannot handle 1 to.
Can handle it,
I
Johnny.
can barely handle 1 to 10.
You can.
Johnny always attracts high numbers in Vineyard Kids.
You,
It's
you
like a
can.
Batman call, I think, goes out on a Saturday night. Johnny Ian's on.
And I think in brackets in the policy under Johnny's 1 to 50, it's just said you have to know him to truly understand this. If fire evacuation plans are being looked at, the biggest one for you guys is Little Vine. So, Vineyard Kids, you take the kids out, leaders take the kids out to the car park and the fire assembly point. The biggest difference is now in Little Vines, the parents will be instructed to go and get their child and take them out for multiple reasons. Number one, from a management point of view, to expect the leaders to escort all these tiny wee kids out is totally unfair and unreasonable. Even from an emotional point of view, you have to imagine for a wee kid, there's an alarm going, it's the sense of emergency, people are leaving, people are rushing downstairs, squealing, and the first what they need at that moment is their parent, just to give them that sense of safety and reassurance. So it's not appropriate for a stranger leader to be taking them downstairs in the car park where they'll meet their mummy or daddy. It actually needs to be their mummy or daddy coming and getting them. Okay? And access and eyes, Sharon's on it. She's great at this. She hounded the life out of me and got 9 out of me. And if anyone can get an access and eye out of me, they deserve some sort of recognition and award.
I think that deserves Staff of the Year award.
It does. But so anyway, she got it out of me, and she will keep records, and they have to be done every 3 years. Okay. Any more questions or answers? That's kind of us done.
What about, I mean, again, it's maybe in the policy that I'm not familiar with. Is there criteria as to what we report out or on, up rather, opposed to the police or whoever?
So there's no criteria written in the policy on that. That'll be kind of at my discretion, what I feel I need to refer on to external agencies or not. By nature, a policy has to find a balance of bringing clarity to things, but not being overly prescriptive, because then it can tie you up in knots.
I don't know if this is relevant, but I suppose there is a slightly wider issue. But there is a level for the wider movement. There's certain levels that we have to report up. So if it involves, for example, senior pastor or someone that's on staff in church, then that will have to go further in terms of our reporting procedures. But we have that in our kind of processes, and it'll be the same thing. It'll go to Craig or Sharon, and they'll follow through those protocols. So I don't know if that's helpful, but just worth noting.
Can I ask just two questions? The first one, because I can't remember, I just filled in the new form, but does it have about photography consent on the new kids form? It does.
It does, Steph, but that one is now old because we haven't put in the thing about the toilet, which has just been updated. So
Right.
start again.
Okay, that's grand. Just so I can access that information, that's fine. And then the second was, I don't know how this works, so I'm just asking the question. You know, if I've gone into schools before, I've been covered because I've been with, for instance, SU. So I've been maybe covered by them as an organisation. I'm now going into schools maybe a bit more independently, and I'm just wondering, will this pertain, does any of this become relevant in that scenario, or is the school covered and I just am a guest?
So this will be totally independent of any of your schoolwork. It'll help with work in schools, but if you're going into work in schools, you'll have to come under their policies and procedures with NEA and what they ask for. Generally speaking, are you working on a one-to-one or like taking a group?
Yeah, taking a group.
So generally speaking, they'll not require additional access NI to be carried out with an EA to do that. It would only be if you're working one-to-one. They may ask for copies of ones that you've already done, but because you're not working unsupervised.
Okay, perfect.
Sorry, a final question, and it's more about being proactive rather than reactive. I'm just wondering, I don't know what training the volunteers who work with kids have had in terms of first aid and things like that, or awareness of things like allergies, because I think that is another, I've certainly witnessed, and not a life-threatening thing, but certainly people not being as familiar with allergy issues, not knowing the contents of something or other. Just wonder if we have some training and awareness for them. But I mean, there's an onus on the parents, I know, to bring this to our attention, but just in terms of our response.
Probably pretty much the stage of needing, as most environments now, of being nut free, regardless of kids, ministry or anything, or even these forms.
Yeah, I'm not even thinking about something like that as life-threatening. I'm talking about, in our family, we have a huge number of kids who seem to have milk allergies. And so there have been occasions where volunteers haven't been aware that biscuits have milk in them, So it's just an illustration of I think we need a wee bit more maybe training awareness.
Suppose that'll be easy to know where we move forward when we've got the forms all done, maybe, Sharon, in 4 weeks, then specific things that arise. The other thing that we need, like Sharon and me, we need to put some form of signage up in the church building that we are the nominated officers, so that any concerns can be brought to us, just that awareness. First aid trained people, maybe wouldn't Sharon be bad to have up too. Johnny, you've got first aid, don't you? So Johnny's our first aider, Sharon. He's just volunteered there.
So I was just talking about this with Steph on Wednesday. If in the scenario that somebody reacts to nuts or there's a bad injury, like are we responsible to respond there, or are we going and getting the parent? Because obviously, well, we assume that all the parents are staying in church and aren't going for a wee sneaky coffee somewhere.
So if there's a serious incident out in Vineyard Kids or Little Pines, I would go and get the parent.
Okay.
So regardless of who's kind of out, even a first aider is really only offering primary aid in that scenario, and the parent is the first really the port of call that we should be going to.
Okay.
Any other questions? Johnny, anything else from a youth end? Because I know everything was kind of filtered through Sunday.
There.
Oh, go ahead. No, I don't think specific. I think the question from Josh about the ratios is helpful. Probably something to think about for me is we do have two adults, but we don't always have a female adult there, which isn't necessarily illegal as such, but it's maybe not the best practice. So we just need to think through something about that. So like I can really speak from my experience, but in youth initiatives, we like the 1 to 10 ratio or 1 to 8 on residentials or whatever. But then generally you try, if possible, to have a male and female there, and we can still run things if it's two males, but it's a better practice, or it's a better ideal to have opposite sexes, especially if it's not a single sex program or such. So it's just maybe something. But one thing I hadn't thought about, well, not that I hadn't thought about, but I think it's not. I think it's okay because the young people are old enough. But that whole toilet thing, because obviously there's in the building. I don't know whether we just give them the keys and they go up and go to the toilet. But I don't know whether there needs to be anything more thought about that. On
There,
any,
there definitely are hugely complicating factors to our building, which have to be risk assessed and managed. Under part of this, the two obvious ones being that the toilets are on a different floor, and the second one being that members of the public can, we have an open building that members of the public can walk into. So from a safeguarding perspective, it does have additional risks that are difficult to manage. And I guess that's why we went back and forward around the idea that whenever they're signed out, they are now the parents' responsibility, because I think that's important, because the leaders can't take that responsibility on until whatever time the parents take them home in the car. But that is why the follow up now, Johnny, has to be communicating with parents, because those risks are there, but they are more likely. We have good processes in place to safeguard the children during structured ministry time. Those risks are more likely to impact and become an issue during tea and coffee time, because things are looser then. And that's why I would like to speak to the kids. I guess one of the things you talked about was good practice and best practice. And that's the difference in sometimes when you're writing policy, because it's good, like as you said about a female leader, that's good to aim for. It's good practice. If we put that in our policy, then the first week that you don't have a female leader, we would have to stop ministry. So to aim for something's good. To write it in unnecessarily to a policy kind of makes us, there's no flexibility for us then, there's no wiggle room.
Craig, sorry, can I ask, it said in the policy about updating our junior helpers or young people that help. What's the best way of kind of offering them some summary of what we've talked about? And they know the code of conduct for kids and behaviours and code of conduct for leaders.
Do they all go to youth hub?
most of them do. Dara maybe doesn't, who comes out sometimes, and
Is it Molly?
Molly, no, Madison does come to Youth Hub, yeah. But Dara's maybe the only one. She has some sports or some other commitments.
We could maybe do it, Johnny, at youth hub. So
Yeah.
we could go at the shirt factory just as like the first 15-20 minutes, and
Yeah.
make it more part of kind of their service to church. And we could even do like a Wednesday night that's around recognizing what they give to church. Because our young people do a lot between media and then helping with this. And actually, rather than it being just training for them, that can be parts of it. But actually, like a recognition week or something for
All
their
their
contribution.
That's a great idea.
Thanks, Johnny.
One thing on that as well is, again, I was on later, so I maybe missed it, but something to worth thinking about. I know you said something about if someone only helps, 4 times a year, they don't have to be checked. And also, like, if someone, really similar to school stuff, if someone comes in and isn't going to be alone with young people, they can still be with us without being police checked. But like, we would have young volunteers, but as soon as someone turns 16, in the context I'm talking outside of church and some of the work I do, we would check them. So I don't know whether that's worth thinking about. Like, someone like Eli who's turning 16 in July coming, and like Caleb will be turning, like, if they're helping regularly, are we, what is Foyle Vineyard setting as a police check level of age? Does that make sense?
16 will be the age,
Okay.
because if a 16-year-old started to volunteer and work with our young people who we weren't as familiar with, we would get them police checked. So we'll get all our 16-year-olds police checked, regardless of whether we know them very well or whether they're maybe new to us. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's an appropriate age to get that check done.
So I might just be thinking, like, there are a few guys turning now certainly in the next 12 months that help with it, that are involved, like Eli, like Caleb. Nathan, yeah. Nathan might have just turned 16.
He did. Yeah.
So yeah, so just to have that on your radar, whoever's responsible for that.
Sharon will get it hunted out of them.
If she can get, as it's been said, if she can get out of Mr. Johnson, she can get it out.
She's the access, and I queen her. I think she's getting commission. Ben, is that us?
Yeah, that's super helpful. Like, I know it's a lot of information, but I really appreciate it, Craig. It's a lot of work going on behind the scenes to put that together. So yeah, I think unless anybody has any more questions, that's really helpful. We've recorded it, so if anybody jumped on late or maybe we're on and then had to come off for whatever reason, we can make that available. And I think for those that couldn't make tonight, it'd be really good for them to watch it and then have covered what we've covered. We'll feed back with this group or the volunteers anyway on some of those things you mentioned and some of the queries we had, and then obviously the policy. And then I think the next step will be doing some form of communication with the wider families and church. I think we can talk about it. But thank you guys, really appreciate your time, but it is important. So appreciate you giving up your night for it, and thank you to Craig and Aaron and to all of you who help and service. So yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thanks very much, Craig.
All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.